And it is the right now, the duty of the legislator to amend this act, sir. And I will urge upon our learned legal luminary, fortunately we are having you as a minister, sir, and you understand this, and we should not allow this loophole or the scope further to be misutilized by the state organs. So 66 must be dropped or should be amended so that it will not harm the fundamental rights of our society and the fundamental, which is the bedrock of our democracy, sir. With this, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. Now, Shri Rajiv Chandrasekhar.
Sir, thank you, sir. Let me start by thanking my colleague, Mr. P. Raji, for introduction of this resolution. I think this debate about the IT Act and Section 66A, which was long overdue in Parliament, and I thank him for the same, sir. So let me start what I have to say with re-quoting what Pilania ji said, a quote from Voltaire, and I quote, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." That, sir, is the essence of our democracy and the essence of what the Constitution promised us in terms of the right to express ourselves. Sir, let us understand clearly what the background is to this debate. Despite being the largest democracy in the world today, sir, India ranks 39 globally in terms of free speech over the internet and has reported a negative trajectory in terms of internet freedom over the last few years. CNN, sir, recently ran a program titled India, a Democracy Sans Freedom, and it describes Section 66A as archaic, draconian, and absurd. In March, sir, March of this year, India was added to the list of countries, and I quote, under surveillance in the latest annual report presented by Reporters Without Borders, an international organization, on enemies of the internet. The misuse of Section 66A of the IT Act, sir, has been raised at various instances. There is overwhelming evidence that there is misuse and discretionary interpretation, parts of which the Honourable Minister admitted earlier today in Parliament in response to a question. We are all aware, sir, that a PIL has been filed recently by a petitioner in the Supreme Court, and there have been fasts and protests by many citizens all around the country. Sir, this is the background against which we are having this discussion today, sir. So, as my colleague said, the IT Act, really a landmark act, was unfortunately passed by this House on 23 December 2008, the last day of the winter session of the 14th Lok Sabha, in 7 minutes flat, without any opportunity for discussion or counterpoints to be offered by the members of this House. And so, while the argument can be made that the Supreme Court may be inclined to look at the PIL and so on and so forth and devising possible procedural solutions, I think, sir, we should not abrogate our duty as parliamentarians. It is incumbent on the Parliament and representatives of the citizens to seek immediate legislative correction, where correction is obviously required. The defense by the Minister, I respectfully state, sir, that the Parliamentary Committee recommended this, is, respectfully I say, facetious, because he is aware of many cases where the government ignores the committee, and in any event, sir, the issues of the law and its impact on citizens, and its weakness and its implications vis-a-vis our constitutional guarantee of free speech, and not about the interpretations of a parliamentary committee. In fact, sir, the learned AG's admission in the court of the potential misuse and the fact that the government now has to issue guidelines is testimony to the large-scale abuse of Section 66A and the rules. Sir, guidelines are not an answer when the content of the law is bad. Issuance of procedural guidelines like raising the level from the inspector to a DSP or IG, does not remedy fundamental flaws within Section 66A of the IT Act. To say it is only a law enforcement implementation problem is mischaracterizing the problem. Of course, there is an issue of abuse by agencies, as recent incidents have shown. The police machinery is not equipped with legal tools to interpret the statutes in online speech cases and caves in, as we all know, to political pressure often. The recent step of raising the level of officers who can invoke a law tells us that officers who have constitutional authority of making arrests under all other laws may even then be misled or misinterpret the law. There can be no better admission of infirmity in the law than this self-admission which the Honorable Minister had to resort to recently. Further guidelines also cannot be a substitute to a review of the Act to prevent encroachment of fundamental freedoms. Added to this, sir, the section itself is bad in law. Hence this resolution in the House to bring amendments to 66A. Sir, let me lay out my reasoning on why a review of this Act and an amendment is absolutely essential, in addition to what my various colleagues have already laid out. So firstly, restrictions on free speech such as Section 66A must pass the muster of reasonableness. Legislation which is arbitrary or excessively invades the right cannot be said to contain the quality of reasonableness unless it strikes a proper balance between the freedom guaranteed in Article 19(1) and the social control permitted by Clause 2 of Article 19. And if so, it will be held to be wanting in that quality, has said the Supreme Court themselves, sir. Undefined and overbroad words such as grossly offensive and menacing character are subject to discretionary interpretations and abuse. That is just a fact. This presents a danger to free speech under Article 91A. The danger becomes even more amplified when even law enforcement officers at the district level can impose this restriction and provision. So reliance on import of provisions from other countries does not assist. The Indian Constitution, as my colleague P. Rajiv has said, is much stronger on the guarantee of free speech than the unwritten UK Constitution. And the judiciary here has wide powers of judicial review of statutes. The Supreme Court itself has observed in the Union of India versus ADR, and I quote, one-sided information, disinformation, misinformation, and non-information all equally create an uninformed citizenry which makes democracy a farce. Freedom of speech and expression includes right to impart and receive information, which includes freedom to hold opinions, end quote. So the term grossly offensive will have to be read in such a heightened manner as not to include merely causing offense. And as Mr. Rajiv has pointed out, so my colleague, the one other place where this phrase is used in Indian law, and that's only used once in Indian law, is Section 20B of the IPO Act, the Indian Post Office Act. The big difference, as he has himself pointed out, is that under Section 20B of the IPO Act and Section 66A of the IT Act, the former is clearly restricted to one-to-one communication, as is the case with most international precedents that the Minister has quoted earlier today in Parliament replying to a question, sir. Reducing the scope of Section 66A to direct communications would make it less prone to abuse. So redundancy in the wake of other statutes in India must also be seen. Criminal statutes have undergone judicial scrutiny and implementation of robust procedures to prevent possible encroachment onto personal freedom. Annoyance, inconvenience, insult, ill will, hatred are very different from injury, danger, and criminal intimidation. The question arises whether you need a separate provision in the IT Act for that. As my colleague Mr. Bandopadia said, why cannot we use the existing provisions in IPC or CRPC to take care of crimes that are already defined under law? So I'll again point out a couple of other infirmities in the Act. The purportedly anti-spam provision under Clause C does not cover spam. It does not have the two core characteristics of spam, that it is unsolicited and that it is sent in bulk. The definitional problems extend to electronic mail and electronic mail message in the explanation that are vast to cover anything communicated electronically, including forms of communication that aren't aimed at particular recipients the way email is. So on the procedural front, and again my colleague has gone into this in detail, Section 66A punishes the same actions in a stricter manner than the treatment and actions under penal laws in India, sir, IPC and CRPC. Further, making it a cognizable offense means a police officer can arrest without a warrant. In combination with the above deficiencies, this exponentially increases the threat to free speech under Section 66A. So sometimes 66A looks like a solution looking for a problem, especially when the father of a girl receiving a cake from a young gentleman can file a case against the cake giver under Section 66A, as happened a few days ago, sir. Considering the potential in the recently demonstrated abuse of Section 66A and contravention of the freedom of speech, it may be worthwhile to explore a review, a judicial review before arrests under Section 66A can be made. The UN Special Rapporteur's report last year on internet freedom and hate speech detailed the tests and procedures for implementing reasonable restrictions on online speech to be applied only in emergency situations for a limited duration, sir. Sir, a free and open internet is important for innovation, connection and economic growth. Therefore, there is a need to review Section 66A holistically, keeping in mind the constitutional tenets and international conventions that we are a signatory to. To those in government who raise national security or law and order as a bogey or a justification, let me quote President Obama, sir. He said, and I quote, "We reject as false the choice between national security and our ideals of democracy," end quote. We can meet both these goals if you are determined to do so, sir. So let me end by saying, sir, there's a clear case for proactive intervention on this issue by the government. Little progress has been made by the government to act on these apparent and widely reported abuse issues. There have been proposals on 2 occasions from the Honorable Minister to constitute an empowered group to discuss all issues on the table and look at alternative formulations. The Minister made this commitment when the first open house was held in August this year, and then again on November 29th, when I understand from press reports that he met representatives from civil society, intermediaries and industry. I attended, sir, personally the open house in August, and it seems to me at least, sir, that nothing has been done in the last 5 months. I would ask this question, sir, why has the government allowed some of these issues to come to a boiling point? Sir, there should be no ego involved here, sir. Let us frankly accept that there is a problem with the Act, its clauses and the rules. I do not propose any specific interpretation of mine for the constitutional guarantee of free speech, nor should the Minister expect us to blindly accept his. Let's accept what the Honorable Chairman of the Rajya Sabha said this morning, sir. He said this is an evolving issue. So, sir, let the law evolve. Let the government constitute a drafting committee immediately with a multi-stakeholder representation, including civil society, to address these issues head-on and arrive at a sustainable, acceptable framework, as in the case of RTI and several other statutes earlier, sir. This is what is expected from a government that represents a great democracy like our country, sir. So please do not ask him to withdraw the resolution, sir. Let us go forward and create a multi-stakeholder way of coming up with a solution. And let me end by, sir, quoting John Milton: "Give me the liberty to know, to utter and to argue freely according to conscience above all liberties." Thank you, sir. I support this resolution.
Thank you. Sri Rama Jose.
Respected Chair, I am rising to speak in favor of the Rajiv resolution.